Hello, everyone. Hi. So it's my very great pleasure to welcome Richard Bartle. And I'm just going to read what he did because he did so much. I cannot possibly express in my own words what he did. So I'm just going to read it. So Richard Bartle has been playing and designing MMOs longer than anybody, having in 1978 co-written Mud, the progenitor of the entire genre. His famous player types model has seen widespread adoptions by the MMO industry and beyond. His book, Designing Virtual Worlds, is the classic text on the subject, and he is an influential writer on all aspects of game design. In 2010, he was the first recipient of the prestigious Game Developer's Choice Award of Online Game Legend. And he is honorary professor of computer game design at the University of Essex, England, where it all began. He is also innumerable characters in MMOs. Welcome.
Thank you for that. I'm not talking about any of those things today. So, when I was invited to speak at this conference, I was told that the theme was inclusive game development. And as I said earlier, I'm kind of not inclusive. I'm not a representation of inclusiveness. But of course, when I saw inclusive game development, I immediately changed the word development to design, because I'm a designer. I'm not interested in development, that just happens. But the thing is, what does inclusive game development mean? Inclusive game design mean? Does it mean the design of inclusive games, so inclusive game design, or does it mean the inclusiveness of the game design profession? So inclusive game design. Is it inclusive game? Is it the design of inclusive games or inclusive game design? So where do the brackets go? And in about 14 slides, we'll probably get to where the brackets go. So let's back up. These slides were much more improved than they are at the moment, because after I heard Warren's speech this morning, I thought, oh, he said that so much better than I did. So I made all the changes, didn't transfer them to my little pen drive. So this is the talk as it was last night, prior to me trying to make myself sound more impressive for having incorporated Warren's views. Anyway, computer game design is an art form. And as with all art forms, there's two main components to it. See, that font didn't make it through. There are two components to it, the art and the craft. That looks so much better than the font I gave it. Oh, well, never mind. The art of any art is what it is you want to say, or what questions you want to ask, as this would have said if I hadn't have just changed it. The craft part is the skilled use of a vocabulary to say it. So when you make a game or when you create any kind of art, you're trying to say something. The craft is the vocabulary you've got to say it. It's the skills that you have that enable you to say what you're trying to say through your art. Because if you don't have the words, you can't say anything. So all artists, in a sense, are craftspeople. It's no good having something to say if you can't speak the language of the medium you're trying to say it in. So here's an example of the difference between art and craft. The one on the left is craft. That's Picasso's Mother by Picasso when he was 15. The one on the right is art, which he did when he was, that's in about 1960 when he did this. So the thing about what this tells you is, I may not understand what on earth's going on there on the right, but every brush stroke on there has been put there deliberately. Because if somebody can do this on the left, and then they do that on the right, you know that that's not a mistake. They've done it that way deliberately. They're trying to say something through there. Whereas on the left, he's pretty well trying to say, hey, look, I can paint. So I'm now going to make an assertion, which is obvious to me. The games industry might not find it so obvious, because games industry designers are kept in dark rooms, fed pizza, occasionally given Red Bull to drink, and washing probably. But for an idealist like me, what I'm about to say is pretty obvious, and that is when a designer is trying to say something through their design, the resulting design is better than if they weren't, because it's got both craft and art. What game designers make are pretty well game designs, so documents. They spend all their time writing. But if you're trying to say something through your design, not only do you have the craft necessary to create the documents, the craft necessary to put the gameplay together, but you're putting it for a purpose. You're trying to say something. So you've got a stronger, coherent vision of what it is, because you want to articulate something to the people who are playing your game. And then that means that the player experience is going to be more meaningful than if it's just a, well, this could have been computer-generated game. Unless, of course, the computer generation is itself under design control, which, if you're at Mitu's talk earlier, you would have heard of. If you've only got craft and you've got no art, you're making a game you don't believe in. And this happens all the time in the games industry, because people are hired to make games pretty well to stop the company going bankrupt. That's the main reason. So you've got to make games that'll sell. Very rarely do you get the opportunity to make games that are art, that are trying to say something. So the people who are making games, generally, they might be enthused, they might like it, they might think, oh, I can do quite a lot here, I can make a pretty good job of it, but they're not going to believe in it, because it's not really saying something that they want to say. It's just like, let's get the code bunnies over here, and the art bunnies over there, and the designer bunnies over there, and we'll have all these bunnies talk to each other, but really they're just doing what we want them to do. Here are some crystals. Now, art gives a game its soul. When works of art are being created, the power that they have derives from the artist's attempt to say something to the audience, to the artist's audience. So the artist's trying to communicate something to you, to make you think. And so as to be able to do this, to be able to speak to the audience you want to speak to, you have to have enough craft, enough design skills and ability to be able to create something for any audience. And a game design studio can, and usually will, ask a decent designer to create a game for any audience that they think they can sell to, and the designer should be able to do that. The designer has to be able to make games that the people who are going to play them will like. It's not that you're a designer, I can only design first-person shooters, or I can only design role-playing games. A good designer, a competent designer, should be able to create in any medium, well, not any medium, but certainly any game area, although we do find that most designers do create in other media as well. Other mediums, media, probably something different in Swedish anyway. But they can only do this if they understand their audience, and that's kind of the key to being a designer, is knowing who you're designing for. Whenever I'm brought in to look at a project as a consultant, people pay me to talk to them. Not much, but the first thing I will ask them is, who do you think's going to play your game? Who's the game for? Who's your audience? Because if you don't know who's going to be playing it, you don't know who you're speaking to. And if you don't know who you're speaking to, well, normally the only time people speak to people without even knowing who's going to be listening is when they're shouting things like, help. There might be somebody outside who can come and rescue me. Help. But you don't create the speech you're going to give and then just go out into the street and give it to random people. So you need to know who you're talking to. Now, how do you know that? How do you know who you're talking to? Well, if you're not a designer, maybe you're a serious games designer, which means you're not a designer. Sorry, folks. Then what you will do is you'll probably scientifically study your audience. You'll say, who's going to play this? Well, this is a game for people aged 7 to 10 who've got this level of mathematics. And you'll do your studies and you'll find out what those people find interesting. And then you'll target your game for this explicit information that you've gathered from them. If you're a newbie designer or a player who's hoping to become a designer, you'll be thinking, oh, this is a game for, well, let's go inclusive. Girls. What are girls like? Boys. I'll make a game for boys. That's how we get so many boy games now. But basically, people who they'll go with hearsay. They'll go with common popular appearances of what people want. They won't have much evidence from it apart from what society's told them. Now, the first one of these is better, but both of these lead to stereotyping because you're not speaking to a particular audience, you're speaking to a particular explicit representation of an audience. Now, computer game designers, and this is going to be a shock to those of you who think you are designers, because you might find out you're not. They employ a third way, which is artistically. Knowing who will play the game kind of just comes to them while they're designing the game or while they're thinking about the game design, when they've been told this particular demographic, the designers will be absorbing information. Their brains will be doing pattern matching, and inside their heads they will be building some kind of a model. So players are modeled in designers' heads as a set of filters. It's not just designers who can do this. A lot of novelists do it. People who write screenplays do it. People who write stage plays do it. Essentially what happens is you have in your head not a picture of somebody, not a set of rules, but I want to do this, I shall put it through this neural network, literally, and out of the other end will come a behavior. That's what these people would do if I did this. This is what these people would think if I did this. So you're kind of modeling people. And sometimes you'll think, what would they do? And there's a number of things. There's more than one thing that these people could do because people are all different. So designers, when they're making games, will apply these filters automatically. They will look at other data because they know that filters aren't always correct and data is always good. But all the data is really doing is feeding into their internal model of who's playing the game. It's not one person that you've got, an idealized person. I'm speaking to you. I was going to point up there, but there's two people walking. I'm speaking to you. I shouldn't have done that either. It's more that the designers got a little homunculus, a little creature in their heads that they can't do anything with other than talk to it. And that will tell them what's going to happen. So where do these come from? It's pretty well empathy. It's where the designers, everybody's got the ability to put themselves into somebody else's position. Now, why are you looking so sad? You don't ask why someone's looking sad. You think, oh, they're looking sad. And then immediately you've built in your model of that person, there's something wrong. This person's sad. But you can do that further. When you're creating characters for books, then you can build individuals, and they start behaving in ways that you think, why did you do that, you stupid thing? I want you to do on this plot here. Why did you go over on that boat? And it's like this with designers, with the players. They've got the idea of who people are, but it's as a process. And they didn't do it methodically. It's just a theory of mind thing. Because from the age of about 3 or 4 onwards, human beings can do what pretty well nothing else that we know of on the planet can do, which is put themselves into the minds of other people and think the world from their point of view. So when a designer like me asks who's going to play, what they're actually asking for are seeds about which the crystals of their model can form. So who's going to play the game? And you say, well, it's going to be played by, and you'll give me a list of things, ages, religious ethnicity or whatever, what languages they speak, what they do. And each one of these things, it's not that I'll be building up a picture, it will be in your head you're gaining a set of almost, I don't know, instructions. It's like a body which, when you put something into one end, out of the other end will appear what that means. And if you're very good at that, you can probably remember them from previous occasions. You've written so many games so many times that it becomes second nature. Now, games, very interactive medium, but game design is rather less interactive than playing games. Because you can play test a game, obviously. You create a game and you play test it, and you get some feedback from the people, and this is where you find out that your model was wrong. But when the game's released, you can't really do that. So you've got this, the person who does the speaking, which is the designer, here's what I'm saying to you. And you've got many people who do the listening, they're the players. And from the designer's perspective, it's a one-way dialogue. I can say things to you, but then you'll be saying things to yourself as a result of what I've said to you. So the players can't come back to me and I can then change the game. Well, it can, but it's a very slow process. What you're mainly trying to do is, as Warren said earlier, you're asking them questions, they're answering the questions, the dialogue becomes their own internal dialogue based on the conditions that you've set up. I've put the words "the players" in quotes there because there's no such thing as the players. They're all different. Every player's different. When someone says the players think this, what they generally mean is some of the players think this. Not all of the players think this, just some of them. But when you design, of course, you can't speak to the players. You're still creating the game. You're still forming your model of the players, or who's going to play it, not the players. So you're speaking to that model. So I'm having a dialogue with a machine I've constructed in my imagination, which will spit out output based on what the players are going to do in my model. The model's never going to be accurate, but it's better than just using statistical sets of rules. Now, when you've got these models of other people, it comes with temptations. So, for example, a designer can underspecify their audience because they want to say something particularly profound to a particular sub-audience. So you might be saying, okay, I really want to say something about movements of people, about refugees and so on, but then you might have something you particularly want to say about some particular group who you feel have been particularly hard done by, and so you write your game about, I don't know, Syrian refugees. That means that the game's, you're saying something very profound to those people, but you also had something really quite profound you could have been saying to a much larger audience, but you've gone deeper. Designers can also over-specify their audience to get to address more people. So if you've made a game about pregnancy, say, that's got a particular audience. But if you then try and expand your game so it speaks about to a wider audience, more people, and pregnancies, yeah, it's in the middle of it there, but hey, look, you can also play this mini game where you play snooker or something. Well, you've tried to expand your audience, but not everybody wants to hear your message, particularly people who've been through 3 or 4 pregnancies and really don't want to be reminded of it. So you can over-specify your audience by trying to speak to people who don't want to hear, or you can go too deep. The first one is too much art. You're trying to say something very specific to a smaller group, and you could have actually expanded it. The second one is too much craft. You're using your design skills to try to speak to people who don't want to hear you, as well as the ones who do. Now, the best designers will neither nor overspecify their audience. Well, not much anyway. They will do it because you never know who the audience is really going to be. But they'll only try to speak to people that they have something to say to, who want to hear what they say. Or not even that, or who the designer feels needs to hear what the designer wants to say. Now there's a problem here. What if you are someone that the designers don't have anything to say to? Well, you've got a choice. You can play serviceable but so-so games which are craft-based. So someone's done a really good design and it covers all the things, and it's put together like a well-oiled machine, but it's completely soulless. Yes, I am thinking of Black Desert Online. As I said that, everything's there, works great, wonderful, but is that game... no, that's a craft game. Alternatively, you can play games with a very deep art, but art that you don't get, it's inaccessible to you, it doesn't really mean anything to you, you haven't had the experience that it's talking to. Or alternatively, you can design and develop your own games, which is actually probably not beyond the capability of everybody in this room, but outside this room, it's not going to be quite as easy. Now, finally, we reach inclusivity. What people who are unserved by designers need isn't for designers who don't speak their language to try and speak to them. In other words, designers implicitly or explicitly trying to make inclusive games. So you've got people who aren't in anybody's audience at the moment. The designers can model them because they're designers, so the designers make a game for those people out of pity. So you're trying to make an inclusive game. That's not what they want. What they need is designers who do speak to them, to be able to speak to them. So the designer profession needs to be more inclusive, not the games. If you're saying, how do we make more inclusive games? Well, you don't make more inclusive games. You employ more inclusive designers, or your design retinue becomes more inclusive. And from this we get inclusive games. Now, so far that's pretty well following the standard arguments why all this is great. But there's more if you think it through. See, when people talk about inclusivity, they generally mean one of, you could easily widen your audience without compromising your art. This game didn't have to be about some particular sect of Polish knights back in the 1700s. You could have made that just a general medieval game, and then it would have widened your appeal and without having lost anything. And then the other way when people are talking about inclusivity is, why don't you craft games for these poor, deserving people over here who aren't being well served? And this is very well-meaning. I mean, it's not like people are deliberately trying to be patronizing, but that's what they're being, by trying to make an inclusive game without really knowing much about, without having anything to say to the people you're speaking to. You can make a game, you can craft a game, but and the game will be playable and it'll be serviceable, but it'll have no soul because you've got nothing to say to the people you're making it for. Now, the former, that's fair enough. If someone says, you know, you set this game in Middle America, but actually it could have been in Middle anywhere, really, couldn't it? Yeah, actually, yeah, you're right. The problems and the things, it could be anywhere. I'll fair enough. You caught me there. I was being overly prescriptive of my audience when I could have been less so. That's fair enough. But the latter, when you're creating games for people who you can't speak to because you've got nothing to say to them, that's misplaced. You shouldn't be crafting games for them. What unserved players need are games that speak to them, not games that speak at them. So what they need are their own exclusive games. If you've got an audience who's not being served, you don't serve that audience by widening the existing audience. You serve that audience by serving that audience. You find someone who has something to say to those people and you let them say it. That's what you do. Now, for all you people out there who are Gamergate members, I'm sure that if you were to put your hands up, you would be killed. This doesn't actually affect you guys because this is opening up games to an audience of potential players who are currently either underserved or they're not served at all. It's finding new players, new seams to mine. It's not saying, oh, well, let's abandon the mother lode that's creating all the gold coming in our way. It's say, well, we'll keep mining that and we'll open up these new seams. And one of the things that particularly annoys me is when people say, if we've got equal numbers of male and female game designers, well, that means we've lost half, we've only got half the number of male game designers. That is not true because we're not talking absolute here, we're talking relative. If you have equal numbers of male and female game designers, you are doubling the number of game designers. That's the important thing. It's by restricting the number of backgrounds that people have got, it's not as if there are only a certain number of game designer jobs and if we give half of them to women, then that means half the men get kicked out. No, because each one of these expansions brings in new audiences, so the whole industry grows with it. So, yeah, of course I want more women game designers because we get more games. It's just, why would you think otherwise? Mainly because you don't think. Now, here's another potentially contentious point, because it plays against some liberal positions. You don't have to be a blue X to speak to people who are blue X's. Clearly true, because otherwise all our games for 5-year-olds would be made by 5-year-olds and they wouldn't really get very far. But if you're going to make a game for a blue X, you had better have something to say to people who are blue X's that either they want to hear or that you want them to hear or feel they must hear. This doesn't mean that you yourself have to be a blue X. For example, you might think, these people here who believe in creationism, they really got it wrong. Let's make a game which, if they play it, they'll kind of realize what a stupid position they're in. So you'll be making a game for creationists while being explicitly opposed to creationists. But that doesn't mean that you haven't got anything to say to them. Likewise, if you're male, doesn't mean you haven't got anything to say to females. If you're females, doesn't mean you haven't got anything to say to males. People have got multiple dimensions to their personalities. If someone's gay, that doesn't mean they can only ever write gay characters. That would be ridiculous. You've got to have something to say to people, but you've got multiple dimensions, and you're going to speak along one of those dimensions, which may not be the one that society chooses for you. So, being a blue X yourself doesn't guarantee that you have automatically got something to say to people. And this is a problem we had in the 90s. Games for women. That sounds so patronizing. When games came out with games for women written on them, that put off women players. And the only thing that put them off more than that, was when it said games for women by women. That put them off even more because it sounds so patronizing. And even though the people who did it were the best intentioned, look, we'll hire these women and we'll give them this game design job and we'll give them some money and so on, and then they'll create games that all you women will play because obviously you've all got one thing on mind, you know, you're all clones of each other. Well, no, of course it doesn't work. You can't lump half the population together and say they've all got the same ideas for games. And this is, in effect, what was happening. So just because you are a member of Blue X doesn't mean that you automatically have anything to say to it. That said, chances are you probably do have more to say than someone who isn't. So, near the end of my time now. To summarize then, if we teach people, this is fairly obvious, if we teach people only to design certain kinds of games, we'll see too many games of that kind. As a corollary, if we teach the same kind of people to design games, too many people will want to say the same things. So if everybody's got a similar background, they've all got something that they're bursting to say, but it's the same thing because they've all got the same kind of backgrounds. So you need to expand who gets to speak. Games can be exclusive if they're going to be inclusive. Just being inclusive, meaning lots of people will play it, well, that tends to water down the art. If you want to speak to an individual mindset, then make a game exclusive for that. And if anybody complains, then just say, well, don't play it. It's not for you. Do you read romance novels? Do you read detective novels? Which ones don't you read, and are you going to complain about them? No, because they're not for you. If you've got a variety of designers, then you get a variety of games for a variety of players, and that increases the marketplace, because more variety means more games for more players, so more win. I want a world with more games in it, more people in playing games in it. Games are a force for good, and inclusivity will get us that. So that's the end of my talk.